Hello, everybody, and welcome to another OSINT Curious Project interview. I'm Michael Hoffman, and I'm here with my wonderful OSINT Curious members and a special guest today, of course, John Marquee. But before we get to him, let's say hi, everybody. Sector, can you say hi to everybody?
Yeah, choking on a peanut here.
Yeah,
hi, everyone.
That was awesome.
Sector 035 over here, and welcome to a nice interview that I'm really stoked about. Laurent.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Laurent. I go by the handle at Laurent Bodo, and I have the honor to introduce you to our special guest today in this episode. And one thing you notice if you watch it, that you can't see his face. So that's because he is just joining us via audio stream, which is absolutely fine. So you're going to listen to him. And yeah, let me introduce John. So most of you who work in the OSINT fields, and especially when you geolocate, you probably know him. So John Marquee, he is an open source investigator and very, very well known for his geolocation skills. And you may have seen also his work that he has done for BBC Africa Eye, the New York Times, and also Amnesty International, just to name a few. And I also highly recommend for anyone who's looking to hire a freelance open source investigator, make also sure to reach out to John. So John, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Laurent. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. So one of the first questions we always ask is, we want to know, understand your way, how you got into OSINT. So tell us about your story. How did you end up in this amazing OSINT community?
Sure. I think a little bit like a lot of people, it was kind of an accident. I think the first exposure to the broader world of OSINT and geolocation specifically that I remember is probably Bellingcat's MH17 investigation. So that was a little far back there. But the one that stands out that really kind of got me into it as something that I thought I should try was the BBC Africa Eye piece called Anatomy of a Killing, which I know probably everybody here is familiar with, and a lot of the community. A video from Cameroon that shows some soldiers executing a mother and child. And so I saw those videos, and I saw what could be, what was kind of the art of the possible, so to speak. And I kind of got addicted from there. Played a lot of GeoGuessr and participated in a lot of quiz time. But really, yeah, just kind of saw what was possible and got inspired.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting because I would call myself like an OSINT all-rounder. So I know I geolocate a lot and I really enjoy it as well, but I also do other things as well. But you seem to, you're very specialized in just geolocation. So what is exactly that makes you so addicted to it? Is it the kind of like game of finding out where that location is, or what is it?
Yeah, it's like a puzzle. I think quiz time is kind of a good way to describe it. It's like a puzzle where the answer is, there's not one answer. There's many ways to solve it, and one of them is geolocation. And I think using geolocation to solve problems like that is addicting to me, because every time I see photos or videos in those situations, it does come to mind to me that, if I lived on that street, for example, that I would know exactly where that was. That would be, my neighbor's house or something.
Yeah.
And those sorts of perspectives you can't really get unless you have more specific information.
So, John, quick question for you. One of the things that we try to understand is if you're willing, a little bit of the base knowledge that you have. Like, did you come into OSINT and your work with a love of maps, or this huge background in geography, or is it just, I can look at an image, I can do some queries, I know how to look at it or where that sign came from my experience, and I can do this? How did you get that base knowledge?
My background, so I don't have any background in geospatial, anything in geospatial intelligence. I actually, around the time that I was first learning about OSINT and getting into it, I was working from home as a security in the security field for a Fortune 500 company.
Okay.
So I had a little bit of experience with looking at sort of, grainy CCTV footage and trying to interpret with, as little information that, you have sometimes in those situations where it's very dark or confusing, chaotic. And so I had that background, but I didn't have so much the background with the satellite imagery or the other sources that come into play. And that I sort of basically just learned by watching, what everybody else in the community was doing and what sort of techniques that they were using.
That's incredible. And I find also, and this brings me back to this specialization, because you can do a bunch of things, but you can't really go in depth. And in your case, I've seen your work, and I also reached out for some help here and there. And it's just that there's so much to it. It's just not like looking at an image and then, if the street name's in it, you can go on Google Maps.
Right.
But what if it becomes more challenging when you don't have a street name, when it's blurry, when there's no imagery available through Wikimapia or even through Google? This is the main challenging part. So what are you doing then?
Right. Well, you're doing essentially the same thing as you were doing before, but you're forced to look for different clues, right? You're not looking for signs or businesses or other things with writing on them necessarily that might help you find the way you would if you had access to Street View. Instead, the things in those situations that I try to look for are typically a lot bigger, things that stand out, things like a big one are straight lines, for example, in nature, or the opposite is nature in a city. So things that are different from their surroundings. Another one is if we're in a city, if there are buildings in the video, how do those buildings compare to the rest of the region that we're in? Are they bigger or smaller, or do the roofs match? All of these things are clues that can help us get sort of closer to a general geographic area and help narrow down the search area that we have to search more specifically.
I have a question for you, John. Being an expert in geolocation, do you have this just an understanding of what sites are going to give you the best data, or do you have like some start me or some Excel sheet or something like that has, these are my favorite sites for this part of the world? If it's a type of a tree, I need to look at this kind of a mapped out resources, private or public, that you like to use?
Not really. Sometimes a few specific examples come to mind, but really I live in Google Earth Pro.
Okay.
That is pretty much my number one tool of choice. There are situations, of course, where Google Earth Pro will not solve something for you, and will have, for example, in some places of the world, the imagery on Earth is very old.
Why Google Earth?
Okay, so Google Earth Pro, a couple of the biggest things for me are the ability to spin and pan the camera down and up and be able to see things like mountains and terrain, and other things like 3D buildings are possible. So it helps to be able to sort of match the perspective of the person on the ground during the checking process. But the other big one is the historical imagery feature. And that's the one that comes into play more than probably anything else in a number of different ways. Not only is it helpful sometimes just to have a brighter image, for example. Maybe the most recent one is taken at an inconvenient time and you can't see things very well. So being able to switch easily to an image that shows something you're looking for is a huge help. But not only that, the different images on Earth, like satellite images everywhere, are taken at different times of day. And that means that the angle at which they were taken relative to the objects on the ground, the angle of nadir is different, and you'll be able to see, say, the north side of the building on a certain day and the east side of a building on a different image. And so if you're looking for a specific orientation of building or a specific orientation of intersection, this can help you to find more information about that particular area.
Okay. And Google Earth Pro is, and you're talking about the free version of Google Earth. I always hate that. It's like
Correct.
Google
It's
Earth Pro. And
yes.
okay.
That just means you downloaded it.
Right.
Yeah.
You've got the desktop client. Now,
Right.
there's also some of those features are in the web-based versions that Chrome and Firefox have, but I'm like you. I would rather just look at the full-blown application for Google Earth Pro and dive in there and mess with the different layers and imagery.
Some of them are, but they can be a little bit more finicky too in the browser. I find it's a little bit more reliable just to open up the pro version of the program, and you can, it's got all the other helpful features like placing a bunch of pins, and you can pull data from other sources and include it in your base map and stuff.
Another useful thing is, and I think it was Benjamin Strick, who wrote a blog post about it on how to add some overlays. So
yes,
we came up here API, for instance, which is super useful because now you not only look at the satellite image, but you also have reference points, like what's actually there.
Exactly.
And also some other stuff. And then also features like create if you're writing a report, this might be of interest to some of our listeners, where you can download the actual image that you're looking at and then also add some description to it. So you can also post-process it. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like an all-in-one pocket knife. It gets everything done pretty well, and you can bring in data from a lot of other places that you don't actually have to go and kind of search it out if you have your sources well prepared.
But are there any features that you miss in Google Earth and that you use a different product for or different tool?
Mostly it comes down to imagery over features, right? For specific areas, other imagery providers will have more up-to-date imagery. The imagery on Earth is pretty bad in some places. So I usually go to satellites.pro or Bing Maps is usually pretty good for diversifying from Google to try to get new, more up-to-date satellite imagery.
Yeah. So, John, before we move on, because for our listeners, you're going to showcase us a case study, which will be very interesting. And you will also describe it for our podcast listeners. And I'm really excited to look at it. But before we go into this one, can you just walk us through a general methodology for someone who because oftentimes people get placed to new posts and then suddenly they come across an image, they need to know where the location is. They have no idea of how to do that. What would be your general methodology of geolocation?
Okay, that's a big question. So an early step that I often take is a technique that's well covered by a Bellingcat article by Yuri. Well, I did in the show notes, I assume.
We can add it in.
What he covers there is essentially, if you've come across a piece of evidence, a lot of what I do tends to be breaking. So we assume that this piece of evidence is recent. And one of the first early steps is if we assume that it's recent and we see shadows in the video or the picture, then we can use that information. If we have a time and a place, we can use that information to determine an orientation of the camera. And what that does for us is it immediately limits the number of options that we need to search. So if we're looking, say, at a road that's running from our vision from left to right, so we're looking at it perpendicular, and we're looking past the road at the sun, and it's noon. And we know that the sun is coming from the south at noon, then we know that that road is running west to east or east to west. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So that's the first step, is kind of taking as many contextual clues out of the general area as we can to determine which way we're facing in general. We don't have to be precise. Another tip for that is if we're near cities, is to keep in mind the background, right? Can we see tall buildings in the background, or is it mostly empty? In a lot of port cities, you can tell when you're facing the ocean because there's no skyline. You might even be pretty close to the ocean.
Yeah. Well, that's...
As far as other methodology tips starting from anywhere, it's difficult to say generally, because it varies a lot place to place. But I would say overall, you're looking for things that are both unusual or rare for the area, things that there aren't going to be a lot of. And you're also looking for things that are going to show up well on satellite imagery because you don't have other sources of information available. And things that show up well on satellite imagery are often tall because long shadows show up well on satellite imagery. And that's another good use of the Google Earth historical imagery feature is if you're looking for something very tall, just flip back through images until you get one with long shadows. And then, it's much easier to pick that out from a further zoomed out position. You don't have to, interrogate every tiny area quite as closely.
So attention to details is what matters here.
Attention to details, but also making it easy on yourself. You're not looking for necessarily the few buildings that have features that stand out. You're not looking for them first necessarily. You're looking for the other bigger clues. Say you're at an intersection as opposed to on a one-way road or something.
John, are you usually getting a clue as to, since you said these are live breaking things, you're usually getting a clue for in this city or this region, this happened, and you're trying to cross-reference what street or locality it happened, or is it just where in the world did this happen? Because I'm thinking about the steps that you just, or the advice you just gave, and I'm like, okay, tall buildings and all. I like looking at things that pop out like the roofs. The roofs over in Europe are different than other ones. So I will try to narrow it down to region. But if you're starting at hey, this thing happened in Yemen, let's figure out where, that might be different.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where having some contextual or just experience in the area can help a lot. If you've looked at a lot of satellite imagery of a particular area or even a particular city, you can kind of get an idea of, this doesn't feel right. It doesn't have quite the same features. And I want to point out that this is a technique that's not perfect, right? It can lead you astray sometimes. There are places where, a small, tiny corner of a city looks completely different or something. This happens all the time, but the main idea behind it is to try to narrow it down as much as possible before you start looking by using contextual information.
All right, then I would say let's dive right into the case study. So I will put it in here. So for our viewers, if you want to check out the video that we're going to look at now, here's the link to it. And without further ado, so here's the video. So do you want me to just play it for the first minute and then I stop around 2:57?
Let me just give a short introduction real quick before we play it. So a little bit of context here. This was about 2 weeks into the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, known as the Nagorno-Karabakh War. This was during a period when there were a lot of allegations of strikes on civilian populations going back and forth across that border. So don't want to get into it too much detail, but it popped up on Twitter, apparent missile strike in Janza. And then this video is local journalists on the scene. So you can go ahead and roll it.
All right.
So this is a situation kind of like you were talking about where we don't have a lot of, for example, street signs to go on. We're following the journalist down a dark street. It's night. We've got some walls on both sides. It's not buildings, not sidewalks. It's just walls. And we're going down this narrow road headed towards an intersection. We're coming up on an intersection. There's a lot of people. It's very chaotic. You can see some first responders kind of coming and going. There's bright lights. And we're coming up on this intersection. We can tell already, so there's a road off to our right, and the road that we've been on continues on ahead. So we're at a three-way intersection. So that right there is our first big clue. And the camera is currently pointing across the intersection. We can see two buildings, and there it pans up to see the one that's close to us. And if we pause right there, yeah, that's a great point. We can see that both of these buildings, so neither of them come to a corner, right, at the intersection. They both have this kind of 45-degree cutout going on. One of them doesn't, we can't tell what kind of roof it has. It might not have any roof. It kind of stops, but it's nighttime, so that might not be reliable. The other one that we just panned up has kind of a domed metallic looking roof. And if we go to Janza, what we see is a lot of square or rectangular buildings with peaked roofs. So right off the bat, these buildings stand out because they don't look quite like everything else in the area. Now, this video came out as part of a Twitter thread from a local reporter, and he mentioned a little further down that somebody during the live TV broadcast said, gave a location. They said it hit near school number 29. Now, when people say that, when you get those sorts of reports on social media, to me, that means maybe within a kilometer or something. People say near, but near means different things to different people. So I'm going to start looking near school number 29, but maybe it won't be right exactly there. So we start looking at school 29, and there are lots of small roads with walls. So that's not going to help us very much. But we can just narrow that down immediately to only three-way intersections, first of all. Three-way intersections that terminate at a wall. And then secondly, we're looking for the two different styles of building or of roof. We're looking for two buildings with those cutouts on them and a big metal roof.
I can also share then the geolocated image that you shared on Twitter. Just let me know when.
Sure.
I can share.
Yeah, go ahead. So after a bit of searching, I found a couple of images or a couple of buildings that looked okay, except the image doesn't show. It only shows from an almost on nadir perspective, right? So we can only see the top of the building, and we can see that one of them has the 45-degree cutout, but because the roof on the other one, we can't see it. But if we go back to September imagery from 2018, the image is taken at an angle from the northwest, and we can see the side of the building in the pink square there.
Oh, that's amazing. So here again, Google Earth Pro was pretty helpful, going back and, as you said, changing the angle.
Exactly.
When it
wouldn't have been possible to see under that roof the same way without using the historical imagery. Yeah. Because you can't, you need to be able to prove the shape of that building, but the roof is covering it if you're only looking at it from top down.
Oh, that's amazing. So generally speaking, like when you encounter these situations where you don't have a lot of footage, you can't go into Street View and you solely rely on satellite images. So using your approach of narrowing it down from, looking at what's around me, is it, mountainous terrain? Is there a lot of whatever trees in the background, and seeing like, okay, this looks like a town. Is it a city? And then going from there, how long does it take on average, to find these spots?
It really depends. Sometimes, 5 minutes, sometimes 5 hours or 5 days. Typically I don't spend, more than a few hours on a single geolocation target unless it's for work. But it really depends. Sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes, you just got to grind it out. There's no magic bullet.
I think that's one of the more challenging things. We take a look at you walking through this, or Laurent, I've seen you, and Sector, I've seen you, and we've all seen Ben Strick do this, and they're like, oh, like for the Australian OSINT symposium, Ben Strick did a thing. He's like, okay, let's see where this helicopter was shooting at a beach. I'm like, okay. And he's like, yeah, so you can see this matches up and this matches up. And in like 2 minutes, I'm like, wow, that was amazing. And then he said, exactly what you said. Yeah, this 2 minutes was really over the course of 2 weeks that it took me. You know, you got to have that persistence, that dedication, that resourcefulness. And do you find yourself with like relying on those types of just dogged perseverance in your work, or is it something different?
No, absolutely. I think the ability to just keep at it and keep trying new things, especially, or keep fact checking your own assumptions, keep bringing new ideas, is definitely something that that you have to have, especially in these information poor areas, because you don't have a lot of different things to try to search for. If you're on a city street with a bunch of business signs, you have a whole menu of options to start searching for.
So how do you know when
this you sort of have to make your own?
So one of the questions that I usually hear from people is, how do I know when to stop? How do you know when perseverance turns into madness and you're like, I've been doing this for 6 months and I can't find anything? Or do you ask for help when you get to a certain stage from somebody that might be able to look at it from a different perspective?
Yeah, there's a couple ways to sort of approach that. And I try to not let myself get too sucked into one for too long in a particular day, right? I'll just put it down for the day, come back to it tomorrow. If that doesn't work for a few days, for example, then yeah, it's a good time to reach out to somebody, see if anybody has some new ideas, because there's maybe something you missed. But I think the main thing is spreading it out over time, right? It's fine if it takes a week or two, as long as you're not spending every single day, all day,
Yeah, that's exactly what I did the other week. And also, as you mentioned, how important it is to fact check your own assumptions. Because I caught myself several times that I make these assumptions and I just try to stick to that. And then I say, it must be in the north, it must be here. And then I can't find it, then I get frustrated. And then I have to tell myself, wait a second, why do you say it's in the north?
Yeah.
Right.
This is also when I reached out to John the other week and asked him for help as well. And then he gave me these clues, and then suddenly it wasn't the north, it was south. And then a couple of minutes later, I found it.
So would you say that's experience? I mean, because here's the thing that I noticed. I did a live streaming for osintcurious for like a whole week, and every day we started out doing like 15, 20 minutes of GeoGuessr. And at first I was like, oh, that's a Spanish road sign. That's gotta be in Spain, right? And over the course of the week, we learned that, hey, this sign along with that shape or that color is probably more in Latin America or in South America, whatever. And so you have that, you build that experience. Is that something that you leverage a lot, and just the prior experience?
Definitely, especially in areas that I spend a lot of time in. I think GeoGuessr is a great example of that. And I played a ton of GeoGuessr back in the day before it became a paid thing. And yeah, you do start to pick up on just little things like, oh, those roofs, I mean, I've only seen them in Austria or whatever. And that kind of thing applies down to a much more granular level when you're looking at, for example, a conflict zone or a series of protests or something. You really start to get to know the areas, and you start to kind of understand what's going to be more likely and what's not.
So the overall techniques that you would use to analyze a video or an image may be similar within different regions, but the more depth, the more experience you have in a certain region, you can sometimes shortcut that process and leap to, these types of streets are only found in the east or the west of that region.
Exactly, and a big part of that, from the example Laurent was alluding to too, is that sometimes what you don't see is just as important as what you do see. So for example, if you're familiar with an area and you know that in this area or in this city, it's common for the main roads in the big parts of the city to be lined with trees and have dividers down the middle and be painted with lines and whatever. And then the video or picture you're looking at doesn't have those things. You need to start to kind of question, like, okay, so that narrows it down to which big roads don't have trees, for example.
That's
And that's the kind of deductive, like it's really just about making it easy for yourself, right?
Well, it's running those mental filters on the data. You know, instead of looking for all the locations where there's this gas station, look at all the places where there's that gas station with large trees around
exactly.
it.
It's using all your clues simultaneously to try to kind of pick out what the least common denominator of all of them is and where they could all kind of coexist.
Excellent. Well said.
Fantastic. John, a more personal question, a more nerdy personal question. Like, how many pins do you have on Google Earth Pro?
How do you count?
Yeah.
Thousands easily. It depends on what country you ask for. So yeah, just a quick aside on that. I have a habit of pinning almost anything if I'm spending like a few days or weeks or months watching a particular conflict or watching a particular protest and spending time looking at the same cities over and over, what I start to do is place pins at anything that I think will help me geolocate something later.
Can you tell us more about that? So are you like saying putting a pin in your desktop Google Earth with a link to a YouTube video saying this video is here, or is it more like this region has these types of signs, or describe more what you're talking about?
Yeah, I am doing what you described. If I find, for example, a dash cam video or a drone video or something showing a particular area that might be useful, I'll put a pin in it with the link to the video. But more often I'm referring to, for example, in the Middle East, one of the common tall objects that you'll see perhaps, quickly panning across a cityscape is a mosque minaret. And so having a lot of the mosques pre-found can narrow down that search time. In Myanmar, it's pagodas. So it's just these more unique. I'll even point out, weirdly colored roofs or something like that, because, you never know if you're following it for long enough. A video comes out and that's the only identifying feature, and you've seen it somewhere.
Yeah.
I have a folder of just, this might help someday.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I've also seen articles, especially mainstream in the mainstream media, talking about like the 10 craziest things people found on Google Maps and Google Earth. What is the craziest thing you have ever seen or found on Google Earth?
Oh, the single craziest thing on accident or on purpose?
Both.
You decide. Yeah.
I think my favorite things to find just on accident are planes in flight. So Google Earth will occasionally capture planes flying, and those are always fun to see. Sometimes you can catch the red, green, blue sort of movement effects in the imagery. And you can do things like tell which direction they're going and how fast.
Sometimes you even see the shadow of the plane, which gives you an even better idea of when it was taken. That's neat. Okay. So do you ever see like the things that people put on the ground to make to purposely get caught in Google Earth? Those signs on their roofs and crop circles or does your imagery take you to other places?
Yeah, I stumble on things like that every once in a while, but typically I'm looking in far-flung places where they're not looking to go viral.
Yeah. Cool.
With their roof.
So I have a question for you. A lot of our audience may just be getting around to starting out in open source intelligence or in geolocation. What are 3 steps, and you don't have to limit yourself to 3, but what are a few steps that you would suggest that they could do to hone their geolocation skills or refine their process?
Totally. I think it's important, or it was important for me at least, to find something or something, some person, some place that I was genuinely interested in investigating. It's one thing to just see something and geolocate it, or see something and investigate it. But if you're a bit more invested yourself, that helps a lot for me. Another one would be to participate in things like quiz time, and be active and talk with people and ask them how they did it. A lot of my early process was bugging people on Twitter. You know, how'd you do that? Like I saw stuff that Ben was doing, Benjamin Strick again, and it just blew my mind. You know, like, what did you do? What was your process? And that's what I was doing at the beginning too. Was just, you know, asking those people how they were doing it.
I asked Ben that one time, and he's like, "Magic, move on, Micah." I'm like, "Damn it,
Denied."
Yeah, exactly. No, Ben's really approachable, and you're right. I mean, reaching out to people. Do you? I don't know if you have time to get into like a community where, you know, you're like a Slack or Discord or anything like that, and see their GeoInt channels. There's a lot of places that have those.
Yeah, the Bellingcat Discord has a few where we do some crowdsourced stuff. The Searchlight Discord has some good resources as well.
Yeah.
The last tip though that I would give, and you know, it comes off kind of poorly to some people I know, but it's just to practice your butt off day in and day out, because it really, you know, there's a lot of things that you can only really click with experience, I guess. You know, it's one thing to understand, but looking at just putting it into your eyeballs for hours a day of satellite imagery really helps with understanding those things of this is what this is going to look like from above, basically.
Yeah. I think this is also what I see, like, is one of the, I wouldn't say problems, but I know I need more training in that. Exactly what you just said, like looking from above and then making out these shapes.
Yeah, it's the translating what you're seeing from side on to what you're seeing from top down, basically. Yeah, and that's why I keep harping on about the historical imagery features, because it gives you multiple angles to see it from different side on perspectives, and you can even catch the side of a building sometimes and you know, see the layout of the windows that you're seeing from the ground as well. So those do kind of get merged a little bit as well.
Awesome. Sorry, Sector, you had a question.
No problem. Yeah, and the thing is, if you the more you do it, the more your brain adapts to it too, and the more quicker you're able to think. But I've got a different question for you, John. If you would have to give advice to people who want to learn more about geolocation, for instance, do you think they should just only practice and just dive into it and just go and practice? Or do you think, like, no, it's really good to maybe specialize in a certain area, or maybe even keep it broad and read about things, about buildings, read blogs on how other people do it, and try to get a broad interest in anything that has to do with geolocation? What would you advise people to do, or any other tips?
I think everybody will kind of come at it from their own way, and that's one of the beauties of it, is everybody's approach is a little bit different, and all I kind of know is the way I go about it. I know the practice was a big one for me, but absolutely learning as much as you can about, if you're interested in a particular area, learning about it, sometimes just by reading or by, you know, watching completely unrelated content, gives you that kind of cultural context that you need to have those insights.
Yeah, and I will also say something about it, because actually 2 years ago, I was debating whether I should actually buy a book about 400 pages talking about brickwork and building styles from all over the world, and I decided not to do it because I'm way much more interested in the technical and social media's kind of OSINT. And geolocation is only a hobby for me, actually. So I decided not to do it, but yeah, I could have been an expert on building styles from all over the world.
Yeah, and that's what I think I would tell to anybody that's, you know, thinking about it, is there's plenty of niches still available. There's
Absolutely.
all sorts of things to learn about and becoming you know, your own little expert in that part of geolocation, even in just geolocation. So
I find myself not gravitating towards books because the things I need to look up will vary case to case to case. So becoming an expert in brickwork in a place where they don't use bricks and it's all poured concrete I mean, it's good to know, but I'm usually, okay, now I'm into fences, now I'm into flagpoles, now I'm into roofing tiles or whatever it is. So doing that quick matrix upload from whatever resources that are available on the internet is always more useful to me personally.
Absolutely.
Cool.
All right, John, thank you so much for coming on our show and to talk to us and then also walk us through this case study. I found it very amazing and very interesting as well. And I keep learning from you, from your stuff that you put out on Twitter. So thank you so much for that. And I also want to point out one last time for our listeners and also those who view this interview, make sure to follow him for more geolocation and also more OSINT in general. His Twitter handle is @John_Marquee. That's with a QUEE at the end. Make sure to follow him. If you have any questions, he's very approachable and super, super helpful. Please do that. And yeah, so John, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Absolutely.
Cool.